So when I talk about unleashing, I was supposed to come and talk about unleashing local capital, but I think we should talk about what happened in Alberta. Really. What happened there? No one expected this, any process. And much of what happened with the NDP getting, it wasn't a vote for the NDP, it was a vote against what was going on to some extent. It was a vote against in some ways to a sense of entitlement, a sense of lack of transparency, and a sense of lack of democracy. And I think that was a big part of what happened in that process. And the NDP seemed to be the alternative compared to what else we had. And that's actually something that's a bit of a movement, it's a bit of an instinct actually within people. That over time, if you start to feel like you're being abused, you try to do something about the oppression to some extent, a psychological piece. And to some extent, where we've gone with finances and process, we become decoupled from our finances to many extent. Many of us are very passive about it. Many of us don't think a lot about it to some extent. But why? But why? And I think part of what we're seeing with this local investment stuff, which is happening across the world to some extent, kind of ties in. So that lesson and maybe from Alberta, what's gone on, that instinct, are part of some of the wider things we're looking at with what's happening with farmers, what's happening with Sangaroo, with what's happening with New Dawn that you'll hear later. I think it's something about the human soul to some extent. Dan talked about love, I'll talk about the soul. So unleashing local capital, I'll present to you here. How much time do I have?
Just keep going.
Just keep going. Really, just so I can base myself. Half an hour? Okay, I'll go quickly. What I'm presenting is a webinar that we do actually every month. It's well attended at this point. We're now getting people joining us from Austria, Australia, California, England as well too. Both what we're doing is, there's nothing magical really about what we're doing. It's just a process. In some ways, a shift of the mindset to make things going. So I'll kind of go through this relatively quickly. Be open for questions afterwards. And our next webinar is June 4th. You can join us then. Actually, Gordon can probably do this. He's seen this enough times, so just ask him to do it, and he'll be fine. So why are new investment models needed? And this is some of the stuff we've done, lots of policy work and discussions with government. You've heard this before. Standard venture capital, the money that's out there, is not interested in rural Alberta. Really. Very, very little venture capital heads into rural areas. The way the structures are set up, it's for larger deals, multi-million-dollar deals, and they want larger returns. They want a 20-25% return because 1 out of 4 of their investments, or 2 or 3 out of 4 fail. And they don't have the same kind of interest in some of the other returns beyond those investments, like employment, stability in the community, and process like that. They've depersonalized the connection of money. It's also very difficult for young entrepreneurs to get debt financing of any sort. That case in San Ludo, as Dan talked about, they couldn't have got any debt financing because A, abattoirs are ridiculous, no one makes money on those, and B, they're young guys, you can't trust them. So what's the middle process in that, okay? And yeah, much of the infrastructure, and that's part of it, becomes increasingly centralized. Not just in Vancouver, but really Toronto, New York, in that process. It's been decoupled from the local community where that money's being made. And in Alberta, somebody here, $5.5 billion this last year has gone into RSPs and TFSAs. $3.5 billion in Alberta went to TFSAs last year. Most of that went out. Some maybe came back to the oil sands and development, but I bet you very, very little. Can't get those stats because there's the sense stats kind of doesn't work anymore. And very little comes back to rural communities in particular. I'll talk about one story around that. All this research we've been doing, what happened about 5 years ago, we started getting very engaged with research at the Alberta Co-op Association and other groups around what's happening with local economic development. And we did various things. We actually did some research on Nova Scotia, which we'll talk about in a bit. And also in terms of West Loch terms, we actually did a case study on this. West Loch is a town that's 98 kilometers to the northeast or northwest of Edmonton. They had a co-op terminal at one point, which was a co-op that was bought out and demutualized, went into Agricor. Agricor had it. They had just made a major investment in a new terminal in Edmonton, put millions of dollars into that. That was 90 kilometers away. They wanted to shut it down because it was only making about $100,000 a year. That's it. So they wanted to drive the business into Edmonton, which of course the farmers would have had to absorb and lose those costs would affect their bottom lines. A group of people got together, tried to find an outside buyer, tried to find a saver from the outside to take it on. Couldn't do it. They came together, and in a very short period of time, they put out a share offer. Not a short period of time, actually. It took them about a year. Going around, having these coffee sessions with people, talking to almost every single farmer, talking to the community members who knew that if this grain terminal shut down, it was going to affect a wide range of businesses. That sense of crisis was there that I talked about. It's a key piece. If we lost this, many people would be impacted. So anyways, what they did is they put together a share offer. One of the first ones to do it. It's a new generation co-op in Alberta where both the users and investors, outside people who don't use the business, can invest together to make something happen. They put out a share offer for $1.2 million, and when you do a share offer, they have a minimum and a maximum. Their minimum was $600,000 or $800,000, the maximum is $1.2 million. Dave Felstad, one of those key leaders that we've talked about, those key people that make things going. The night before, on a Thursday, he couldn't sleep because they'd only reached $600,000. He thought all that effort they put into it was for naught. They were, the terminal was going to be lost. He went to the community center where the shares were being sold the next day, and there was a lineup for a block and a half around the block for people to buy the shares. And they actually had to stop selling shares because they raised their maximum. That terminal, that was 9 years ago now. It has paid 7% every year for the last 8 or 9 years to its investors. It's done, when they first started, no bank would touch them whatsoever, including the agricultural bank, which is supposed to take higher risk investment in loans, didn't touch them. Paid 7% every year for the past 9 years. They've done 3 rounds of expansions, all self-funded. They can now get any kind of banking they want, very high credit rating. Last year, a year and a half ago, that terminal surpassed the grain handling capacity of the Agriport terminal in Edmonton. It's now the most profitable terminal. It's the most profitable terminal in its, for its size, proportionally in Canada. From local investment, local ownership, local capacity. And it's a big, really important piece. That was a very inspiring story. We looked at that. And then there's some other people who learned from that. You'll hear about that later. This guy, you see him over here, he's right there. See him? There. He'll talk tomorrow, very inspiring story. And I won't go more into that, but hold on to your hats for tomorrow. And again, you've heard enough about the CETA stuff. These are some of the figures that I got from Chris Payne before he went into sabbatical. Yeah. So some more recent stuff that I've heard about. We could correct you about that. But I think the interesting thing to note around this, and we've seen, and folks can recognize this, when the funds in Nova Scotia first started, they started with bricks and mortar. Safe, simple investments to get the ball rolling. We call this sometimes barn raising in the 21st century. It's how communities used to get formed. We've lost that local capacity. Our muscles have atrophied around local investment, and you want to get in there slow. I went actually golfing with Ken yesterday. My muscles hurt like heck because I haven't used those muscles in a long time. It's painful. And that, the first investments you do, the first process, as Dan has talked about, will be painful. Don't be around it. It's hard work. And Linda will talk to you about that. It's volunteer, right? It's hard work. You're not spending your time watching what's up with the Kardashians. You're spending time making reality TV in your own community. And it's a big part of it. There's an enjoyment about it, there's an engagement about it, and it's fantastic. You've heard about that one already quite a bit. Of course, with Dan, an absolute pleasure in my life is to have met Dan and be able to work with him, the kind of character and value base that's so important. It is about that value base of those leaders. The people you hear around this are those salt of the earth. That ego thing, I think, is a very important piece that's subsumed over their need for the community. That was a fantastic, and that was our flower child. There was a bit of a perfect storm around that in terms of leadership process. Having done the research, we had just finished the research on the CETA model in Nova Scotia, and it was a perfect opportunity to apply it. And it was a fantastic experience. I've done this kind of work. I used to live in Vernon, and then live in Vancouver as well too. And I've been doing this kind of economic development work for almost 20 years. I've never seen a model and a process work so well for engaging community, engaging social capital to make something happen. And it's not about the capital. Every community has millions of dollars. They have all kinds of business opportunities, small, big, and large. It's what's the gap, what's the middle parts between it, and that's the leadership around it. 2, 3, 4 people with some engaged followers who play tag team to get things going is extremely important. We got some money from the Rural Alberta Development Fund just because of the success of Sangudo. They were quite happy with that to go further with the process. Sangudo had to start off with loans. At that point, we didn't have the RSP eligibility. We got that process through. Wanted to take in what we had, learn from Nova Scotia, and we had discussions with Battle River Railway and West Lock Terminals. What would have helped you go further? And a tax credit? Well, in Alberta, we don't pay taxes. So that might change next week, but so the rule for tax credit was nowhere near the same kind of benefit. But the RSPs worked, so that was a big piece. We also went further. There was a lot of work that was done by Sangudo in terms of being the first through the door, being very bloody. That's why Dan is so skinny, because he lost a lot of blood through that process. It's hard, but we learned from them, share those documents, your lease documents, your template, your share offering, all those money that you pay to intermediaries, those professionals out there that are supposed to do the good job for us, but take a really nice commission from you on the same process. We've tried to make that very simplified and make it as public as possible so people can recapture that power, that muscle to make things happen. So we've developed a series of guides and processes. We started to roll it out, and one of the first ones to do the RSP eligibility was Crow's Nest Pass. We were working with them as one of our pilots when we got this cash to get us through this process. And an interesting thing that happened on the way to this investment. Their first idea was actually to invest in a hotel. If you've been to Crow's Nest Pass, you have a beautiful area, nowhere near like a Cochrane or other places, but it has some kind of the same potential. What's happened? Well, this is some historical stuff. One of the key barriers to development down there is it's fairly narrow, and the highway through that area is supposed to have been doubled for the past 40 years. People have been talking about doubling that highway, and development has been stymied to some extent. So these guys, after we started working with them, sat down and said, we got to make something happen. So they went to Alberta Highways and said, is this piece of land we're looking at for this hotel, which we sorely need, going to be okay? And Alberta Transport came back and said, actually, yes, it's fine. We'll give you a letter of comfort that this piece of land will not be used in the process. Great. No one else had ever thought of doing that. They did it. The next week, someone else came to the town and scooped the deal. The process. So we were ticked. Yeah, see that? That's why I said, And that's what they said, It happens in almost every community we've now worked with. A group of people come together who are trusted, have respect in the community, have social capital, say, we're going to do this. And then someone says, well, if they're going to do it, so can I. Because they do the kind of initial work to show the confidence of the process. Same thing happened right now in Sangudo. That business had been for sale for 2 years, that meat shop. No one was touched it. They thought it was gone. They put together, that took 6 weeks for us to turn that around in Sangudo. The day that the offer went in, there was a counter offer the day after. So just by this group coming together and saying, I'm putting my reputation on the line, looking at this, you drive economic activity. So we now expect that to happen. We expect that. We tell that when we sit down with groups. Your first one, it may not work, most likely because someone else will scoop the deal. Okay, expect it. Great. Use that as a sign of accomplishment that you're onto something. And these guys did that. They didn't turn around, so they went and bought a heritage building, converted it. Shane, as Stuart is there, he's the chairman of the local community Futures. There was some conflict of interest in that. They had to work through it with a few different processes. We're at the point now, though, in communities of the size that you're in a community of 2,500 or 5,000 or less, if you're sitting with your core group of members doing the investment and there's no conflict of interest at the table, you've got the wrong people at the table. It's a small community. The people who do something are the people who are engaged across everything. So if there's not enough conflict of interest, we actually, either someone's lying or you got the wrong people at the table. You need that. It's social capital. And conflict of interest is not a problem as long as you declare it. If this guy's son is going to benefit from this because he's the entrepreneur, great, declare it. He removes himself from the decision. But actually embrace that process because you want those very active people. So anyway, they did this, they turned it around, they paid off their debt on the whole process in 1 year, and they're declaring a dividend this year. This is 2 years later. Okay? So, and they're now looking, the hotel business is back on the track because the other guy was a scoundrel, of course. And, so that could well be their next investment. They're talking about other stuff as well, too. Again, this being part of the whole broad movement, we had the joy of going down, Dan and myself and a few others, to the UK last April to look at the co-op movement in general, but in particular there's something there that got community investment shares. Somewhat similar to CDIFs and other processes as well too. Been around for quite some time, but communities, particularly small rural ones, and some larger ones, are using these to invest in local key infrastructure. In shops, many small communities like the Walmartization of retail is happening everywhere. I think in the UK it's the same thing. Small communities are losing their shops. People have to drive to get even the basics. The first community-owned shop came together, used these community investment shares in 1996. There's 430 of them now across the UK, all across the UK, doing quite well. Some of them volunteer run, some of them fully operational and doing quite well. Football clubs, as you know in the UK, it's like a religion. Some of these clubs are being bought up by the large football clubs for feeder clubs, and they're losing the local, they're moving them out of the community. There's a number now of cooperatively owned football clubs using the community investment shares. You've heard about Rider Pride. Same kind of thing, because riders, the fans actually own the team. These folks own their team as well too. Actually, and some of them actually are on the verge of making a profit. One group got together in Manchester because one of their teams was taken away. They bought their team, made it going well, they started to win. They had enough revenue that they actually collected 14 million pounds, that's almost $30 million, to build a new stadium. And they're not putting seats in the stands, because people don't sit anyways. They just cheer. If you've ever been to one, we go Oilers or go Canucks. They have top 12 stanzas and 13, it's amazing. And the pubs. And now I want to talk about this one. This guy right here, and this comes up when people talk about co-ops. What do you mean, is that a communist plot to take over the world? Well, it's true actually. We've been doing these co-ops in Alberta now for 5 years. We now have an NDP government. No connection. This gentleman on the right holding up the beer with the balding one, the really good looking one on the left. He was a former investment banker, made lots of money. He went back to his community where he was born to retire. And in the UK, the pub is the center of the community. It's not just a drinking. They drink a lot there, but less than we do, a couple of pints for the most part, except for Stuart. But it's kind of convenient. The kids go and eat there and everything else. It's where you go after work. And they were going to lose their pub, because pubs in the UK, most of them were owned by the breweries, and that was their outlet for selling the beer. They're closing all across the board. He came in and said, well, we should actually look at doing this. He could have bought the pub himself, easily. He had the money to do it. But no, he stopped and said, we want to see if the community can do this. They called for one public meeting. People came up. He said, well, we think we want to do this and actually buy the pub and make it work. He had a commitment of £500,000 that evening for people to do it, because they wanted it, they saw it. And their bids at precedent. Ended up collecting $700,000, bought the pub, and leased it out to new entrepreneurs. So what we did in Sangudo, and what we've done in other jurisdictions, is the same thing. There's a process there. It's the money, it's the connection. New entrepreneurs come in, take it on. They wouldn't be able to do it otherwise, because the barrier to get in is so high. And invariably what happens, 2 or 3 times, once these businesses are bought and turned over to these new ownership, particularly the retail ones, their revenues double or triple in a very short period of time. Happened in Sangudo. Went from 1.5 employees to 14, and even higher when it's people. Same thing happened over here. A tripling of the revenues, because suddenly everyone's an owner. And where are you going to go have your beer? Over there, or wherever else. Where are you going to go watch the soccer, or where are you going to go buy a pint of milk? It is about leadership. That's a huge part of it. We've developed all kinds of processes. I'm going to move through this next part quite quickly around this. When Dan and I have done this process, and you heard me say this before, the tools and processes are there, the regulations are there. You can get through all of that. You can make it work if you have the right leaders. It's 80% about getting the right leaders around the table. People who walk through that wall and make it work and put their reputations on the line. That's a big part of it. So we've developed a guide in the process with the one we had before, and Gordon has a copy. I can share it freely with you in terms of the process. Most of what you heard, and Dan wrote a good chunk of it actually, and Don McNair over there did the editing. So there's stuff in there that's just, it's about the process and how you do it and how you get through that. I'll go through it quickly. It's around identifying needs and what are people bitching about in the coffee shop. Well, stop bitching, let's do something about it. Let's get off our asses and make something happen. What are the common themes? What have people constantly said? They should do something. They should, it's well, we should. Bring it on. You've heard that from Dan already. A big thing we look at right now is owners of retirement. This baby boom generation, 1.2 million businesses in Canada owned by baby boomers. I've heard the stats of something like it's $1.8 trillion up for grabs. 1 in 4 businesses that could put up for sale actually sell. The rest close down. And in rural communities, you know what that's like. This is a wave that's happening now, you're experiencing it, and we're not really going to have the policy chops or thinking to kind of go around the next level. We think this investment model has a way of filling it. It's not the answer for everything, but it's a key one. So look where your businesses are retiring, owners are retiring. It's the first place you should look for this process. I'll talk about that a bit more. The right champion is a huge piece. Do you have the right leaders? We've got one community I've worked with us in 2 years. 2 years and 2 months, no, 2 years and 3, it's been a long time. The leaders aren't quite the right people. We've had other communities where it's moved very, very quickly in 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, because we've had the right leaders in part, and other factors, but getting the right people is very important. We often find the best thing to do in a good connection council is always great. in terms, so you're not going to, you can get through some of the roadblocks if it's any kind of issues around regulation and zoning. Having someone on your group who's got some financial background. And when I talk back about that gentleman who started the pub in the UK, it was a great example around that. His greatest piece of contribution, that was not his money, it was his reputation. If he's doing it, if he's the wealthy guy, he's investing, and all they want is $10,000 from people, no more than that. Because you want to spread it out as much as possible. And it's their reputation that gets this thing going. And so having one of those people on your group I think is quite important. It's all about this, and Dan's talked about that. This is about people who remember that the Calvary ain't coming. No one's going to come from the outside and save you. It's not going to be like the past. It's we got to do it. We are the Calvary, and we got to make it happen. Yeah, so at OECs, we talk, there's lots of ways, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but think of it as a local venture capital, a local mutual fund, locally owned mutual fund. Barn raising in the 21st century, but it's about the return, and we're getting pretty decent returns compared to market, at least 6%, and depending on what you're averaging out at some point, we're actually higher than that. And we don't have any tax credit on this. We have the RSPs. This is the purpose of the co-op. It's to support and facilitate the development of businesses and undertakings, which, in the opinion of the cooperative, is to support the local economic activity, social activity. The service that this co-op is providing is investment in the local community. They don't have another avenue for doing it easily. That's what the service is providing. And choosing the right investment is very important. I talked about that before. For your first one, I often very suggest make it a simple investment. Buy a piece of property, buy a building, do a flip on it, whatever the case, but you're getting that muscle moving. And it's easier for people to do their first investment in the conceived field. After that, you can get some more interesting stuff, and Rankin will talk later. They've started basic, and now they're doing some very interesting things. And there's farm works, there's genomics taking place, there's a body imaging machine, I think that's now gone to the public investment, all kinds of different stuff. Once you got the process moving, you can get to more complex things. Keep the first one simple. I talked about most of our investments now are 5-year terms. We're doing some more that are going to be the 10 to 15-year range around renewable energy. That's coming up. This is a slide that Don will remember because he drew it. Around the local investment process. You want lots of ideas because your first one probably won't work out. Doesn't matter. You've got the right people at the table, you'll find the next one. I've already talked about this process. Again, it's a key piece. There's a market demand for buyers. There's not the right financing tools. You look at going to happen. If there's a business in your community that's key and important, you can do that. I'm actually going to have to go back a bit early on Thursday. I won't be able to stay because I'm going back to work in Stony Plain, where there's another meat shop. With that, we're looking at doing the same thing in that process. The baby born, fantastic meat shop. People wanted to stay, and we're going to see if we can replicate the process that San Luis done over there as well too. And a piece around that, we're looking very seriously. If you want to talk more about this, Dan is now working with this process around employee shared ownership. When you sell a business on the general market to someone else, it's got a good 50% chance of surviving. If you sell it to family, transition to family, it's only got a 30% survival rate. If you sell it to the employees, it's a minimum of 80% survival rate. They know the business, they're living in the community, they got the process, the knowledge is there, they just don't have the financing to make it happen. And so this is where a key role can be played around that. And we're putting some effort into that as well too. And it can be either buying the business straight out or doing bridge loans for the process or actually helping leverage the share purchase by the employees. Quite excited about this. We've got a number going on right now and lots of calls right now with this new change in government. There's actually some more possibilities, but even so without that, I'm working with 3 different groups now looking at renewable energy investments in Alberta using the same model to invest in renewables. And I would hope we have our first offering out by September. It'll be about a $3 million offering. The investment process is key. We could get quite technical on this. I'm going to take my jacket off. I always get sweaty when I talk about this. It's important, actually. This is interesting. I actually had a call this morning. I had to walk out. We've been doing this now for a number of years. We've always been scared. What we do with our process, we've got the templates, the share offering documents, the corporate. We do not give it to people until we met them. And if I met you right now, I probably wouldn't give it to you as much if I like you. No, I got to pick on somebody. I never really picked on him. But it's around the trust and process, because we know if this gets out there, someone's going to try to screw it up, okay? And they're going to mess it up for the rest of it. That's why we have these regulations. The regulations out there for securities law are to protect people from fraud, particularly seniors. 80% of it is around fraud. We don't want We don't want people lying to us. We don't want people trying to pull a hole over our eyes. How do you show those numbers? How do you disclose the risk? That whole process has to be clear. We've got someone now who's trying to abuse the model, so I'm a bit concerned about that process. They've heard what's going on. They attended one of our webinars, and they've gone on their own and they're trying to do it. And so we're trying to deal with that right now. So actually, let me take a moment to breathe. Okay, I'm done. So that we've spent a lot of time with the Securities Commission on this process, and this always comes up. Well, you can't do this. You can't do this. Remember, regulations are there for people. Regulations were created by people. Laws were created by people, and there's always exceptions. Okay. If you've got the right people, if you've got the right idea, and the right process, you can make it happen. We fortunately have the right connection, the right process. If San Diego hadn't worked, we wouldn't have been anywhere. But because we had a case precedent, we're able to move forward with the regulation. So I get lots of comments back and forth. We can't do this here. You can do anything. You can ask for forgiveness later. Just make sure your first one's a success. Then it's a lot easier to ask for forgiveness, because no politician is going to support a ruling on you if you've got a successful investment in business that's creating jobs and returning something to people. They will not try to shut you down on that if you've done it right. So be extremely careful about your first investments, and you can do extremely well with them. So why the co-op model? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is we use the same trustee that they use in Nova Scotia around us, the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, which actually works under license with Concentra Financial. Concentra, as they call it, is the credit union for the credit unions, for the most part. So that's the main body we work with. The other one is the co-op model itself. And as I talked about, the regulations are there, securities regulations, to prevent fraud. Well, we have if you look, we were talking to Securities Commission back about a year ago and said, well, what we want to do, we've got some very great success. We want to actually increase the limit, because we can actually go to about $1 million using current regulations, which are based on a national exemption instrument, which applies across Canada. So what I'm saying to you right now, this model can work in BC now. Right now. You can go back and do it right now. You won't get the provincial tax credit, but you can get the RSPs. And guess what? By June, July, we should have the TFSAs. You can do it. I'm saying you can do it. Whether you want to do it or not is up to you, but I'm not a lawyer either. So it depends what your risk tolerance is at some point. And part of this co-op model as well too. And this is a big argument we made with the Securities Commission about going forward. Securities regulation are there to stop fraud. If you look at the cases, we went back, and the number of cases of investment fraud cast Canada and US for the last 3 decades have all been perpetuated by corporations. The number of cases of fraud perpetuated by co-ops issuing investment shares across Canada and US the last 3 decades is 0. It just doesn't happen. Because who in their right mind would have a one-member, one-vote process and be able to and try to make it? Can't. It's very hard to manipulate. It doesn't mean businesses don't fail afterwards. But the fraudulent, which is what the regulation is there, where the costs coming about the audit and the lawyer are there to prevent fraud. And if co-ops don't have an ingrained mechanism for preventing fraud, because it's democratic structure, why do you need regulation? It's to the point that that picture down there, there's a beautiful guy on the right. The guy in the middle is actually Lord Glass, and he's kind of the champion of co-ops in the UK. Those community investment shares that we talked about, they have an individual limit. At one point, it was £10,000. That's the limit you could do without, what, I got 5 minutes? Perfect. That's the limit you had without, you threw me off. There's a little blip there. That's the limit that you have for any individual investment without them having to go through a prospectus. They just increased that to £100,000. Almost 200. Any individual investor can invest up to $200,000 in these community investment shares without having to go through a process. Because they've had hundreds of these now, and there's been no problem. And they work. So that's in the UK. We get a lot of our precedent from the UK. Well, let's take that, our government system, for example, which is a bit screwed up. We also, from that, accompanying us into UK was this guy on the left, Bill Wemmick. How many people here have heard of Walmart? How many people here have seen advertising in the US around Walmart? Do you ever notice when you're there and you see it, it's with Walmart, great sale, we cut the prices on this, except in Wisconsin. If you read actually a paper article and says, we've got this great sale on this product and everything else, and a little fine print except in Wisconsin. That's because Bill Wemmick, he was a consumer rights lawyer. He took on Walmart and won for anti-dumping. That's why that's going on. And so very successful around that. He knows the process. But he has since come on and become the executive director for the co-op network in the US. Wisconsin, Minnesota has the highest concentration of co-ops. Co-ops in Wisconsin and Minnesota have zero need to report to the Securities Commission when they issue shares. No cost. I've seen their documents for raising millions of dollars. They're 8 or 9 pages long. Because fraud does not happen. Those external costs are not necessary. I make these points and stress on them because it often comes up when people, well, we can't do that. Well, you can. We can work on process and process, and these are the ammunition, the tools, and the thinking we need to move to the next level. So we are working on some aftercare stuff as well too in the process. You know, the work, again, we don't do a lot what Dan has had to work with. For example, we've had some issues with the decisions on dividends and tax shelters around that, and some of the people working through that. We're trying to codify that a bit more and get some centralized services around that. We're moving now because we have enough of this concept almost of social franchise. We want the ownership local, the decision-making local, but how do we federate the costs? Federate the legal costs, federate the accounting costs, all the process. Keep ownership local, federate the costs. And we're in that process right now. Yeah, so we're now looking at they're now eligible for tax-free savings accounts. Now, we know they're eligible, we've got word on that, we just have to develop the process, and we hope to have it out by July. And Dan, actually, again, might be the first one. So, at the break, guys, when the bar is open, please buy Dan a drink. He deserves it, a massage, and a blood transfusion as well, too, for going through the process. We're looking at expanding them all to BC, and we've talked about, very happy to come out here and work with you folks and make something happen. We have the confidence we're doing in Alberta. We think you can do it here, looking at Saskatchewan. We're actually looking now to equity crowdfunding. That's a new regulation coming in Alberta. That'll probably come here in BC, where you can actually do equity put the crowdfunding out and give equity to those who invest into it. We may even link into that. We've looked at establishing a securities dealer, and we may end up doing that. We're actually in the process of doing our first full offering memorandum based on these principles. That'll be our first step towards that. And again, that's the renewable energy one, so that'll be coming out soon. And we're looking at developing more on the ESOP model as well too, to help in that transition. Again, getting the tools out there, the process, so this stuff becomes second nature in some communities. So we figure we've been able to reduce the transaction costs from doing this regularly by about 75%, because we got all the documents, simplified the process, make it clear, using plain language, not the legal speak. We don't get the interaction with the Securities Commission like they do in Nova Scotia. They're not involved. They don't want to be involved. Okay. They're quite happy though. I should mention we're now talking with them about these other components, about the equity crowdfunding and everything else. A year and a half ago, they didn't want to talk to us. First they ignored us, then they laughed at us, then they resisted us, and then you win. It's the process. Isn't that Gandhi or something like that? We go there now, and they're happy to talk to us. You see the president, we have 10 of these in Alberta now, and we'll probably incorporate at this point, not all invest, but incorporated. We're likely to have 12 by the end of the year or more. We've got a president, we've got it behind us, we've worked out, we've been hard, clear on what investments we think should go forward. That's a key piece, because if some of these fail, it'd be very hard to do it again. But that's we're finding now that we've got the support, we've got the political support now as well too. Before the change happened in government, we were actually sitting down with our Department of Agriculture. They were looking at actually providing a guarantee on the principle behind some of these investments. That scared us. I'm swore there. It scared the crap out of us. I said, I got 1 minute, and we'll be done. And it just shows that the support is there in the process. We've done it. So go slow. Make sure your first ones are very clear and very viable. Get your precedent going. Make sure you've got the right people in it. And the rest will follow in terms of exemptions and process. So each of the communities we're now working in that are either incorporated or going to incorporate, there's actually 3 more that are coming out. We expect to have one in Lahi. We expect to have one in Camrose as well too, and another one in Stony Plain in this next short while. So it's a bit of a movement now. I don't know if we're not as established in the CEDIFs. It is Alberta, you know, yeah, blue cowboy hats. We do what not. Now they're orange cowboy hats, I guess. And yeah, so it's interesting to be part of this process. So it's not about the money. It's not about the business itself. This is a quote from Peter Couchman, the guy who led our tour in BC. It's about what this community wants to be. And you put your time in. If you sat down and looked at all the time that you put into the community you're in, I bet you it's $500,000. Why not take 10,000 and put it into your local community? What are we doing with our money around that? It's not that. It can make a huge difference. So I'll cut there because that's my time.